Good morning, and thank you for having me here. I'm excited to have traveled from Seattle to Tokyo to tell you about Bluebox and everything we've been able to do within the last 90 days following the acquisition by IBM. I want to start and go back to the beginning of OpenStack. And in this talk, I want to present the foundation of OpenStack, as Mark touched on. It is a key component of IBM Cloud strategy moving forward, a component that is fundamental to everything Bluebox does today, and a component that, as Mark mentioned, is rapidly changing. So OpenStack was founded 5 years ago as a project, and in the beginning, it was a very simple set of technologies. There was Nova, which was the compute driver, and Swift for object storage. And it was a pretty solid offering. It did two basic things. Two things that, if we keep in mind, in 2010, Amazon had been doing for a number of years, so a little late to the game, but it worked well. And it was missing a number of things. It was missing a deployment framework. How does somebody actually install OpenStack? It was missing a dashboard. It just had a API, so how does somebody interact with OpenStack? It was missing orchestration. Once OpenStack is running, how do I actually maintain that platform? How do I monitor it? How do I roll out upgrades? Which is particularly important when the development cycle is every 6 months, there's a new release. And it was missing block storage, which was a pretty key component back in 2010. And so the original set of code was released in an open source capacity, and there wasn't a way for commercial users, or for end users to go by a commercial entity. How did an end user who wanted to use OpenStack actually get started? And this notion of the distribution was born. So what were we dealing with? OpenStack is a very complicated set of technologies. It's become ever more complicated in the last 5 years. As Mark mentioned, there are countless numbers of projects. I think it's above 15 today. And the reality is that assembling all of those pieces into a functional operating platform is very difficult. Distributed systems are difficult to manage, upgrade, and operate. Python is a unique skill set, and distributed systems engineers who understand Python are at a premium. Lastly, it takes a lot of time to understand OpenStack, time to follow the community, time to understand everything that is changing in the platform. And so if we go back a number of years, around the Diablo or Essex release of OpenStack, some of the early contributors had an interesting idea. They thought if we could take OpenStack and simplify its distribution and consumption, we could come up with something that sat in the middle between taking open source code and doing the installation yourself, or going to a provider like Rackspace at the time and using a public cloud as your offering. I think there was also focus on how Linux solved this problem. So Linux was, again, in its early days, a complicated set of technology that needed somebody to come in and package and make the installation easier. And the Linux distribution was the result of that. So I think many people in the OpenStack community thought that a software distribution, the packaging of OpenStack, would allow them to have a commercial offering that simplified these pieces. And so the OpenStack distribution was born, and it very quickly blossomed. So today, if you go to the OpenStack website, there's a marketplace that lists all of the vendors who sell OpenStack products. And in the distributions section that lists all of the providers selling software distributions, there are 25 listed today. There are 25 different companies that provide a packaged version of OpenStack for you to purchase and install. So the problem is, I'm not convinced that that's actually the right way to do this, to consume OpenStack. So why am I not convinced? Well, one, because I don't sell a distribution, I sell a competing product. But let's think about this. The public cloud, which we've all been using for years, is not sold as a software distribution. The public cloud is sold as a service. You go, you pay a monthly fee, and you expect an experience, you expect an SLA, you expect an API, you expect those things to work. There's a reason the public cloud isn't sold as software. because it's not a scalable method going forward. So distributions, in my opinion, do not solve that cloud reality. We're not selling software, we're selling an experience. Second, OpenStack is not Linux. When a single Linux system goes down, you may have impact to one database. When an OpenStack environment goes down or has a problem, that might be your entire production environment. And so the blast radius, the impact in a failure from Linux to OpenStack is much greater. And selling it as a software distribution doesn't pay attention to that fact. So enterprises haven't had incentive to go take these software distributions and use them. And they had time to wait, and so they did. And they tried public clouds instead, and they got used to that public cloud experience. So we ended up with an enterprise disconnect. Enterprises realized that Amazon Web Services or the public cloud was not a distraction, but a direction. That using technologies as a service was a viable way to build your next generation applications. The success stories of companies running applications on public clouds became far too numerous to ignore, and it went far beyond Netflix. We're beginning to see hundreds of companies, thousands of companies talk about the things they've been able to accomplish on these public cloud platforms. And enterprises began to realize that differentiation through infrastructure is not a winning strategy. Enterprises need to differentiate and build their businesses based on what sits on top, on the applications they can build, not on the technology that those applications run upon. We've also seen a shift now with the maturity of OpenStack. So in the beginning number of years, many enterprises asked, what is OpenStack? And by far and large, we're beyond that point now. Today, we see the conversation being, how do I get started with OpenStack? Some still call OpenStack a science project. And I think the challenge that we see is that because it hasn't been a platform that has necessarily been easy to install or operate, we do hear a lot of challenges about failures of installations or failures of pilot projects because there hasn't been that simple solution. And enterprises largely have had two options to consume OpenStack. They can hire, train, build, use a software distribution to get going, which again is labor intensive, takes a lot of time, and it takes a lot of expertise. Or they can let somebody else do that for them. And so the OpenStack-based public clouds were one option, but for the private cloud implementations, there haven't been many other options available. And so a funny thing happened in the last couple years. IBM, as Mark mentioned, at the beginning of this year, pulled all of its assets together from the various groups into the IBM Cloud Business Unit. And in doing that, they created this one cloud platform vision, open by design. So IBM's vision is a local, a dedicated, or a public cloud, all running the same set of technology, the same open source components, providing an infrastructure layer on which everything else can be built. Mark kind of touched upon the pieces that sit on top of that. We were introduced to IBM at the beginning of this year, and in the process of M&A discussions with many of the companies involved in OpenStack, we became fascinated with IBM's strategy. The Blue Box IBM acquisition was closed on June 2nd, and moving forward, we're focused on this mission. How do we put the cloud experience, consumption as a service, back into private cloud? How do we make private clouds in the enterprise successful? Blue Box looked at the market, looked at OpenStack, and realized we can blend together many of the benefits of public cloud and many of the benefits of private cloud into one offering, which could be called private cloud as a service. From a public cloud perspective, bringing elasticity, the OpEx or as a service billing model, ease of use, and a fast timed implementation, together with private cloud benefits such as data sovereignty, isolation, knowing where your data sits, control over the environment administratively, cost predictability, and hybrid capabilities. Merge those two, or all 8 of those benefits together into one offering and manage that for the customer. So a Blue Box Cloud installation is a IBM managed product that delivers a private cloud to a customer, allowing them to work with OpenStack, not on OpenStack. I'll go into this in much more depth in my session this afternoon, so if you're interested in architecture, please come join us then. But the key point is the technology was designed in such a way that it allows a customer to get started at a very low price point with a very small architecture. So this is not a very expensive proposition to get started, but one that allows enterprises to experiment and to begin with OpenStack very easily, and also an architecture that will scale out and support enterprise production workloads. Part of the IBM strategy involved not just dedicated, which is a hosted model sitting on SoftLayer, but local. How do we take the same technologies, the same operational practices, and bring those to the customer's premise, sitting in a customer data center? And so the Blue Box offering has both capabilities. The dedicated model sits in SoftLayer. The local model sits in a customer's site. Both provide OpenStack as a service to the customer. Again, I'll go into much more detail on that this afternoon. So why do customers choose Blue Box? Why do customers choose private clouds? Well, first, security is often the biggest driver. So organizations that have compliance-oriented workloads or want to know exactly where their data sits, private cloud is a logical solution for those organizations. Control is also another driver. So administrative control, being able to know who is in and working on your cloud, and cost control, being able to predict what your bill will be a year from now. Those are much simpler in a private model than they are in a public cloud model. Predictable performance, as Mark mentioned, one of the benefits of SoftLayer and the benefits of bare metal is having consistency in that performance, so you know exactly what to expect out of your environment. And with a private cloud, you are your own neighbor. You don't have other customers sitting alongside next to your infrastructure using your resources. And then lastly, operational excellence. As I mentioned, the Blue Box environment is fully managed by IBM. So upgrades to OpenStack are handled by IBM. Security patches to OpenStack are handled by IBM. Response to outages or issues with the cloud are handled by IBM. And so that operational excellence, combining all of that experience into one entity, gets customers a better experience with OpenStack and makes them more successful. As I mentioned, Blue Box was acquired by IBM on June 2nd, so we are almost 90 days in, a little under. And last week, we announced the availability of Blue Box Cloud on the worldwide SoftLayer footprint. It was great recognition by the press. We were excited with the reaction, both in that it was a way to demonstrate the capabilities of Blue Box and the speed at which we're able to integrate with IBM. And it brings the Blue Box Cloud platform to a much more global audience. So the 27 SoftLayer data centers that exist around the globe can now have this same capability running inside of them, and the customers in geographies that Blue Box historically was unable to access now have access to our offering. So in closing, OpenStack provides customers immense value. Private cloud provides customers immense value. But the distribution model that has historically supported OpenStack installations is flawed. And it's flawed because customers generally aren't successful when the operations of that cloud fall in their lap. Customers want to work with OpenStack, not on OpenStack. And a private cloud as a service model solves that for them by taking the operational burden of OpenStack and of the infrastructure away from the customer and allowing them to focus on driving innovation and differentiation in the application layer. We can make customers wildly successful where historically they may have been struggling. IBM is the only company globally that is able to do this. So you can take IBM's footprint with SoftLayer, their experience with enterprise requirements, their commitment to an open cloud and open technologies, and combine those all together, and we've got a very differentiated story that I am very attracted to and think will have tremendous success in the years to come. And lastly, Blue Box is available right now. So with the announcement last week, customers can go and purchase these installations in the Japan data center from SoftLayer. So with that, I will have a more technical debrief this afternoon. Would invite you to come join me if this is interesting. Thank you for having me here in Tokyo. Exciting to be here. And that's it. I'll hand it back to Mark.
Thanks, Jesse. Next up, I'd like to bring on stage a SoftLayer customer, 6 Waves, and Takano-san, to talk about what they do and how they leverage the platform. Thank you.